All right. Welcome, everyone, to another Savory Institute webinar. My name is Bobby Gill. I'm the Director of Development and Communications here at the Savory Institute. Ooh, I have an echo in my ear. 1 second. Haha. Sorry about that. Little technical difficulties. Anyways, today we are here. We are going to be discussing the new book, Wildflowers, with the Savory Institute Hub leader out of Central Virginia, Daniel Firth Griffith. This is an incredible book that I know you are all going to love, and it's going to be a really wonderful conversation. Before I bring Daniel onto the stage to talk, just wanted to let folks know this is live streaming over to Facebook and YouTube today. So on Facebook and YouTube, you can enter your chats. And when you chat in Facebook and YouTube, those chats will show up here on the side of our screen. So feel free to ask any questions that you may have for Daniel or myself today. But to kick things off, we've got a short little video that we're going to play, and then we'll dive into the Q&A.
I sit under a cathedral of whispers. I hear murmurs of pains, of new life. The great hand strikes, or so I am told, but I sit, whispering. Touch a wildflower, no beauty. Hear its humming and no rhythm. Smell its nectar and no nourishment. See its perfect geometry and no creation. To do these things, to regenerate, we must sit and we must whisper. Intimacy is rest in the arms of community. Timshel Wildland is a 400-acre emergent and process-led landscape. That is not untrue. Really, the Wildland Project is a community of the senses, an intensive investment intended to inspire intimacy. Regeneration is hope, but only if it is first a relationship. Using rewilded grazing and foraging animals within wild and seemingly chaotic management systems to drive ecosystem succession and habitat creation, our wildland is attempting to restore the dynamics of wildlife and wild process on our land. It is a vision that places human life just a little bit closer to being native to this place. Although we are building soil, sequestering carbon, restoring biodiversity, and regenerating our water mineral cycles through the holistic and regenerative management of our place, we are also learning to stop, to listen, and to see. Perhaps we are doing all of this because we first learned to stop moving, and to start being. Yes, our wildland is about being the gift of life itself. It is in many ways far too real to regenerate from the inside out, from the soul to the soil.
From the soul to the soil. I love that. Well, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Savory Hub leader from Central Virginia, Daniel Firth Griffith. author of the new book, Wild Like Flowers. Daniel, how you doing, sir?
Hey, Bobby, thanks for having me on. It's a blessing to be here. I'll make
Yeah.
a quick note before we do anything else. On our farm, we have horrible internet, so I trekked about an hour 15 into town. I'm in the guest bedroom of my friend's house. Behind me is this blank white wall, but in front of me, I have this gorgeous view of this huge red maple tree in the sun. It's like 70 degrees today, but the sun is just flying over the sky. So I might be dark up here and light down here, and halfway through the interview, it might reverse. The sun is just kind of cresting through the window. So just bear with me, but I'm enjoying it. It's great.
Yeah, I think the reflection off of you, will allow us to see the trajectory of the sun throughout the course of this interview. So, perfect. You got those natural elements included versus
That's
I'm
right.
just in my basement. So, you win on this one.
I appreciate it.
Man, I'm really glad to have you here. This interview came about, one, because Daniel has a new book out, which is incredible. And for anyone that is interested or who hasn't read it yet, you can go check out Daniel's book. It's called Wild Like Flowers. You just follow that link, bit.ly/Wild Like Flowers, and you'll be able to see it. But Daniel and I have talked a lot, on the phone, through various, Savory Network, dealings, over the past year or so. And every time we get on the phone to talk about, something small and short, it ends up being like a 3-hour conversation deep in the philosophy of, regenerative ag and holistic management. And we're like, man, we need to have these types of conversations in a public setting where people can see. So I'm really excited for this. And, one thing I was thinking of, Daniel, is, the name of your hub is the Robinia Institute, but the name of your farm and the name of, the umbrella term for all the different operations you have is Timshel Wildland. Mm-hmm. And you intentionally didn't call it Timshel Farm. So tell us a little bit about that choice in language in calling it Timshel Wildland and, give folks an introduction of, who you are, where you're from, and what you're up to.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. No, I hope this conversation turns into a 3-hour conversation writ in like an hour 15. So it's a blessing to be here. And I'm just thrilled to talk with you, Bobby, and everybody else throughout all of our social virtual life. So Timshel Wildland, it's a great question. It was a decision made by my wife and I to call it a wildland, not a farm. When we first started farming, about 6, 7, 8 years ago, we did call it Timshel Farm. It was a farm and name and brand, and we felt very comfortable with that. Our transition over to a very wild system, what we call a wild land, is very well written in the book. It's really the point of the book to really go through and take a walk with us in the previous years of our farm as it transitions to a wildland. And so not to push the book, but this answer really is, writ in the book. But for the folks who haven't read it or have yet to read it, I'll describe it this way. Timshel Wildland is owned by my wife and I. It's family land here in Central Virginia. Timshel is a 400-acre process-led, regenerative, and emergent conservation landscape that nurtures, ecosystem regeneration, carbon sequestration, nourishing foods, biodiversity, and it also encourages and nurtures species habitat, both for the farm, the domesticated livestock on the farm, but also wild species like butterflies and deer and black bear and coyotes and everything in between. We believe, and this I think is going to gravitate more towards answering your question more succinctly, the difference between a wildland and a farm, but we believe that we managers, land managers, are co-pilots in the vehicle of resilient regeneration, right? And all we do is help the drivers of ecosystem succession, of ecosystem function, the life around us from cattle to carrots to crown beard, an indigenous native weed here, to do what they do best, right? To drive ecosystems. We're in the passenger seat, they're in the driver's seat, and we like it that way. We still manage them, but it's a management based in partnership, right? We're still in the same car going in the same direction, not control, right? We're not in the driver's seat and they're next to us as if they're in the ride. We are in the ride, which is, we're riding alongside of them, which is really, again, what the book is about, learning to stop, learning to observe, and to see the natural world as something that we participate with, something we have a relationship with, but also something that we are entirely a part of, right? It's the difference between management and control that, we can dive into later in this conversation.
Yeah, I love that. And, that's huge, I think, in holistic management is, this, there's often a tension, I think, in agricultural spaces or, in other spaces between make and let, trying to make something happen versus letting something happen for, what is the best expression of what that wants to be. And, I think it's beautiful to have this intentionality in, the name of your operation, in, the holistic context that you guys have that, you're able to express, so beautifully. And what that means in terms of the decisions you then make for what you do on your farm, or as a Savory hub working to help producers in your region, or any of the other things that you have. It's all guided by that context, and so I think that's really beautiful. For folks that have not yet read the book, I want to read a passage from the very beginning, because I think, when you hear, oh, there's a new book about regenerative ag, you're likely to think of the how-to and the practices and, the charts and the worksheets and, all the science and all of that. But Daniel's book, which, here up on the screen, Wildflowers, the restoration of relationship through regeneration. It's a very different kind of book, and I think very needed. So I want to read this passage from the beginning of the book. You say, any persons looking in this book for prescriptions will be disappointed. Any persons looking for practices will be turned away. Any persons looking in it for processes will be warded off. This book is a wildland anthology of short stories and essays that describe an emergent abundance that can only be designated as gifts given and not awards won. This small book of spells is written to be picked up and put down, allowing you to jump from one cover to the other. It is small so that you do not have to jump far. This book is about being, not doing. Leave your polybraid at the door. So you've written a book about regeneration, but it's not the how-to book. This is, everything that I've felt as I read it is, this is the why. This touches on that deeper aspect. We all get really lost up here in like the, how do I do this? And when should I do this? And at what time? And what's the outcome? And what's the production efficiency? But you're kind of taking the conversation from here and moving it to here, which we don't often see. So, why'd you do that?
That's a really, really good question. It's a really good question. Let me do this. It's a little spontaneous. Let me read. So you read the first sentences of the book. Let me read the last sentences.
Okay.
To walk in wildness is to foster the restoration of relationship, to reinstate honor and humility and purpose in a world thirsting for regeneration. It is in many ways far too real to regenerate from the inside out, from the soul to the soil. And one of the reasons that I wanted to read that, and really one of the reasons why we wrote the book, is the how-to side is incredibly important, right? The soil aspect of the regenerative and holistic movement is imperative to, in my opinion, surviving as a species, and really for all species to survive, the next 10 to 100 years. But to get there, we have to start with the soul, right? You point it to your head, then you point it to your heart. The head, the how-to, is how we build soil. Very important. But the heart is why we build soil, right? It's the relationship we have with the natural world that then gives us the ability to attack the how-tos for actually building soil, sequestering carbon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, that's probably a pretty good transition to, why we wrote the book. What gave us this understanding to embark on a very creative process in crafting a book. It's something that's revolutionary. If you've ever been a part of a deeply, I will say spiritual, but deeply poetic creative process, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You just immerse yourself entirely in the thing that is in front of you. And what comes out is deeply emergent, meaning that, there was no outline for the book. It was just a true creative process that brought the words from my soul and pasted it onto the screen. Well, anyway, so in November 2nd, 2020, just a couple months ago, my wife and I had our third child. We named her Sequoia, a beautiful baby little girl. And for those, on this call here who have children, I think it is a shared reality that first week that a parent spends with their newborn baby child is empowering, but it's also humbling. It's elevating, but also grounding. And during this period at the very beginning of November, my wife and I were talking about our baby girl's name, Sequoia. Now, my wife was very adamant, and I agree with her entirely. It's a beautiful idea to name her after the tree and have the spelling of her name be following that same manner. It's more feminine, and she's a baby girl and beautiful, and so the name fits and the spelling goes along with it. But the name of the tree actually is derived from the name of an indigenous chief of the Cherokee people. He was from Georgia. And so that's really who we named our daughter Sequoia after. Well, long story short, not really the topic of this webinar, but I've written a history of the early American West. And in that research, it was published last year. In that research, I learned a lot about indigenous cultures and folklores and wonderful, wonderful topics like that. It even steered my research away from what I was doing. And I wrote the book more about that than the main subject. But in that research, I learned about this gentleman, this Cherokee chief named Sequoia, who lived about the time of the Trail of Tears. So we're talking 1810s, 20s, 30s, into the 40s. And big backstory that I'll summarize here for time's sake. The Cherokee people are an old nation in Northern America. Some estimates range that they've been here and understood themselves as a single people for about 10,000 years. And so they're old in this area. Well, anyways, roll around the 1820s and the Andrew Jackson administration and natural rights, right? And the great American people thought that cotton fields would look better on Georgian fields than the Cherokee people, and they went west, what became known as the Trail of Tears. Well, anyways, for the first time in the Cherokee Nation, the history of the Cherokee people, distance had separated them. Up until this point, they had not documented their language. It was a spoken language, a living language, a beautiful language, but it was not documented. Why do we need to document language when we all live together in tribes and unity and in communion and community? Well, anyways, that was not the case anymore post the Jacksonian administration and the Trail of Tears. And so what Sequoia did to conquer the lack of community produced in this historical epoch was to document language, right? And we can dive deep into that. But the point is, getting back to Wild Like Flowers, Sequoia as a name, as a person, as a meaning to me means that language can foster community. Language can heal community. And so, as somebody deeply involved as a Savory hub and also, the co-founder and runner, the daily operator of a 400-acre, highly intensive wildland, language is hard, right? What does regeneration mean? What does it mean to have a relationship with the natural world? What does it mean to regenerate, right? These are all really important questions that we need to answer. This is a pivotal time in the regenerative movement. This is a pivotal time in the climate change world that we live in. Can we actually produce a climate in a world that we can thrive 100, 200, 300, 700 years in the future? And so studying the soul to affect the mind, the soil is what this book is all about.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And, like you think back to an evolutionary biology context, you look at the history of Homo sapiens on this planet and you look at the distinguishing features that allowed us to thrive and to, become the species that we are on the planet today, with the good and the bad of that. But language being a critical component of that because it allowed us to transfer thought between one another, which other species don't have the capacity to do so. And that allows us to retain knowledge and pass it on and to accumulate knowledge and learnings and all that comes from that, and community being probably the most important of those pieces, since we are, such a communal species. I did want to bring up a question that we're getting from Mark on YouTube. He says, how did your journey to regenerative ag start, and how does that connect to the Cherokee for you?
That's a really good question, Mark. So my story, I was recently on a podcast. It was an hour and 30 minutes long, and all we did was talk about my story. And so what I'm going to try to do is take it from here and bring it down to something much more tangible and small for us. And so it might be clunky, or it might jump over way too many different epochs in my life, but more or less homeschooled child of four, one older brother, two younger sisters, all brilliant, much smarter than myself. But I always gravitated towards sports. My dad played college sports. My vision growing up was to play college sports. As a national champion wrestler, NCAA Division I football player, as a recruit, never actually made it. You'll learn that in the story. My teammates, as I look back, it's so strange. I look back at this era of my life. I have friends today who are NCAA national champions in wrestling. I have friends who go to the Olympics for wrestling. A good friend of mine is a Super Bowl champion, defensive back for the Eagles, Philadelphia Eagles. And so that was the caliber in which I played sports. I was very good, and I loved every second of it. Long story short, my senior year in high school, running, it was the first day of two-a-days. It was August 1st. First day of two-a-days, the second practice. So in high school, you have these things called two-a-days, where there's one practice, you have lunch, then you have another practice. Mm-hmm. It's the beginning of the season. At the time, I was highly recruited, really could have gone anywhere I wanted, the top, middle linebacker in the state of Ohio. Very good at what I did, which was tackle people, which is what I love doing. Even in wrestling, all I did was tackle people. There was very little finesse. Well, anyways, the first two-a-day, August 1st, we were jogging around the field as a warm-up lap. And about halfway through the warm-up, I just collapsed. I fell right on my face, intense pain in both my hips and my shoulder. We come to learn months later that it was actually a severe genetic disease that had only just manifested itself with symptoms. And I spent the next, 3 or 4 years trying to understand it, surgeries, complications, tests, procedures, traveling all over the country, really to no avail. I got no better. I only got worse. To put that in perspective, my junior year in college, I weighed what I wrestled in sixth grade, and I cut 20 pounds in sixth grade in order to make that weight class. So I weighed less than I did in sixth grade.
Jeez.
I just had wasted away. This genetic disease was literally eating my body. And to make a long story short, years into this journey, I was married to my wife. She was working full time. I was actually reading Joel Salatin's Folks, This Ain't Normal, a book given to me that I knew nothing about regenerative ag or local ag or sustainable ag or anything like that. But I was reading it on the back porch. My wife and I were living at my family home with my parents. That's about all we could do. I was more or less a vegetable in terms of physicality. I mean, like, my mind worked, but my body just wouldn't follow. And I was reading this book that a friend had given to me, a really good dear friend. And my mom walked out the back patio door, and she had a little tear in her eye. I'll never forget this. It was a spring day. There was a fire sitting next to me in a chimenea that I had made for myself to keep warm. I was waiting for spring, but spring wasn't quite ready to come yet. One of those spring days. And she looked at me with a tear in her eye and a smirk on her face. She said, "Daniel, we've traveled around the country. We've done tests and surgeries. I mean, I've laid on tables and they've taken my leg off. And, I've done crazy things to try to fix the root cause of this just genetic disease." And she says, "But nothing has worked. Nothing has. We're still at where we're at, probably even worse." And she looked at me, and this is when the tear kind of left and the smirk got bigger. She said, "The only thing we haven't done is get chickens." And I kind of smirked and laughed, like, "I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean the only thing we haven't done is got chickens?" Well, she was like, the only thing we haven't done is like participate in the local food system, right? And I say this now, it wasn't really fully clear then, but it's the difference between active health and passive health, between expecting health to come visit you and actually re-gearing your life to go grab health, right? Active versus passive. And we had been passive up to this point. And what she was doing is instigating this transition, this blunt transition from passive to active. That very day, without asking my wife, it's still a joke between my wife and I, we bought 100 chickens from Murray Hatchery. They came like 2 weeks later. We dove head over heels into the process, raised those 100 chickens, started gardening, started working with a friend who gave me the book, Folks, This Ain't Normal by Joe Salatin. He had a couple hundred head Irish Dexter farm here in Medina. I think he's actually on this webinar. Jeff, if you're here, hi. He runs an awesome farm in Northeast Ohio, Royal Fair Farm. Brilliant, a true mentor and friend of my wife and I and our family. But we started working at his cattle farm and really getting our hands and feet very dirty and very happy. And health started to return. And now, many years later, I sit here, positioned as I do within the regenerative movement, thanks to my mom, thanks to Jeff, and thanks to an intense desire for health, right? When you're at the bottom and there's only one way to go and it's up, it's not a cliche, it's really true, right? Going to grab health is sometimes the only thing you possibly can do. And then that's what we did. So,
I love that. I did not know that. I didn't know your athletic background. That's good information so that next time I see you in person, I don't try to tackle you because it sounds like I'd lose.
Well, although I have strength, I mean, like my wife and I run a 400-acre farm. So I have pretty good strength today. I'm still not very active. I have never sprinted after that day on the football field. I've yet to sprint many, many years later. So you might win, but I need like 15 seconds and I'm done. So
yeah, well, I have a feeling that, it will, those sprinting days will come back at some point. All right, so I wanted to dive in a little bit. I'm seeing some questions come in. Scott on YouTube is asking, you can see on the screen, what comes first, building soil or healing of, the regeneration of the soil? Brandon asks, what do you think is your unique view of regenerative ag versus others in the space? I was picking up on something as I read the book, and I highlighted a few passages that I wanted to quickly read. There seems to be a common theme with them. So you say that patience is the prerequisite of regeneration. You also say the web of life is complete within itself and requires management, not control. And then there's a little bit longer passage I'm going to read. You say the foundation of regenerative agriculture is humility, and it's important to leave space for context. Growth emerges out of being humble enough to stop and listen, to consider and observe the beautiful patterns of the natural world. Regenerative agriculture is about honing our senses and learning to listen, not about no-till drills and subsoilers and topographic maps. Those are tools, not foundations. Its abundance arises from working within the natural world to enhance our world's abundance altogether. So those quotes that I just pulled from the book, to me, seem like there is a subtle critique of mainstream regenerative ag narratives happening. Would you agree with that? And if so, can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, is it better if I get in the sun or out of the sun?
Lean into it. Sure. Why not?
Why not? Just
I don't know.
Get like this glow of my face. Okay.
Yeah.
Just start yelling at me because the sun is moving. I mean, it's gorgeous. I'm like getting a suntan in
warned
March,
us it would happen. So can't complain about nature.
So is it a critique? I think it's a silent critique. I think it's a very passive critique. It's a humble critique if it is a critique. I have certain philosophical challenges to mainstream regenerative rhetoric. For instance, what's the difference between dirt and soil? Well, the answer is soil is living, dirt is dead. But when you actually step back, and if you read the book, there's a whole chapter dedicated to this question. And I write much more eloquently than I speak. And so you would enjoy the book more than listening to me speak at this moment. But dirt is only dead if rocks, right? Which is just or dirt. Let me start over. Dirt is just really old rocks, right? That decided to be something else. And soil is really old rocks that decided to be something else, that invited bacteria and fungi and nematodes, protozoa, and all that wonderful soil food web stuff to this party. And the festivities began, right? That's what soil is. It's a party in the soil, in the dirt. But dirt isn't dead if rocks are animate. If rocks are living, right? If they are created beings in the sense that we are, that trees are, right? That bugs and birds and cows and carrots are, then dirt isn't dead. It's just not a party. And so that is a very simple and kind of fun way of examining, this one little subtle critique. So dirt and soil, is there really a difference? One is fully alive, one is still alive. It's not dead. Another part in the book, there's an essay, I think it's like chapter 7 or 8. It's called Essay on Wilding. And in that, I really challenge the farms, be it conventional or regenerative, control over natural systems, right? I start, and if you've read the book, you buy the book and read it, you'll notice I use a plethora of different literary sources to really dive into what I'm talking about, from Shakespeare. If you like Shakespeare, he's pretty much quoted in every chapter. But in this case, it's Walt Whitman, in my opinion, the greatest poet of all time. Definitely the greatest American poet of all time. This chapter begins with Walt Whitman talking to this child, and it's a meditation that he has over the course of literary English or American history. It's known as his cemetery meditation. If you can go back to your college years, maybe you studied this in a course. But anyways, he has a cemetery meditation where a child walks up to him and he asks, "What is grass?" And in the poem, which is The Leaves of Grass, which is like a 400 or 500 page massive poem. And this chapter, by the way, takes the whole poem and boils it down to about this size, which was one of the funnest things I've ever done. And definitely one of the best things I've ever written, I think, in my opinion. But he looks at the child and he postulates, right? Like he's lost for words. He says, "What is grass? What is the grass?" Like this is what the whole poem, the whole book, the whole 400, 500 page manuscript is about: leaves of grass. And it starts with a child asking it, which is beautiful. The humility of a child actually inquiring, what is grass, right? And he starts talking about it. He calls it a uniform hieroglyphic that sprouts upon, black people and white people, he says, which is really interesting because the time that he wrote this is in 1855, right? This is at the height of Bleeding Kansas. John Brown is wreaking havoc in the territories of the American West. The American Civil War is just about to commence. And he's writing this, right? That grass is a uniform hieroglyphic that sprouts on top of the graves of black and white, right? He's talking about something really interesting here. And then he stops. And let me just pause here for 13 seconds and pull it up. I have the book in front of me. And he says, let's see it. Okay, here it is. He says, "Grass is the beautiful, uncut hair of graves. Grass of graves, simply magical." There's some words there. But he continues, and this is really interesting. And stop me if you think it's not, and I'll just, stop. I'm totally okay with that.
Please keep going.
This is what he says. He says, "Tenderly will I use you, curling grass. It may be you transpire from the breasts of young men." Turn the page. "It may be if I had known them, I would have loved them. It may be you are from old people and from women and from offspring taken soon out of their mother's laps. And here you are, the mother's laps." And then I write, to summarize, the last line of this stanza is paralyzing. "And here you are. Yes, the offspring that early were taken are here in the mother's laps." What Whitman achieves in a few words has taken modern science entire lifetimes to figure. Grass is not growth, and it's neither vegetation nor is it nature's solar panels. It is not the carbon sequestering mechanism that will save the world. Rather, it is the carbon and the humanity and the world itself. Grass is the hair on the graves of the dead, our dead, nature's dead, its own dead. In that great way, grass is also the ancestral legacy of regeneration itself. And then I say this, and this is the part that I say that whole story to answer your question, which is this: life lives on life. And what Whitman's cemetery meditation is claiming is that death is not complete, but something completely necessary for growth. Life lives on life because death feeds life. And in that way, death is not death, but another form of life, feeding itself, right? This is the rhetoric that the regenerative movement, in my humble and honest opinion, needs to maybe not adopt, but challenge, right? To really struggle with what is death and what is grass. Like, I get it. I'm a grass farmer, solar farmer, right? These are all terms we throw around on, YouTube Academy type videos. And I agree with them, right? In many ways, that is carbon, right? Understanding carbon sequestration
or the water cycle, depending on how you want to attack that same climate change induced problem, is understanding grass, right? The grazing herbivores and understanding herd impact. And this is holistic management. And it's also regenerative ag, right? It's all together in this uniform hieroglyphic, but it's also death, right? And so in many ways, this book is about humbly and subtly challenging the regenerative movement with the inoculation of holism. I think in the book, I say that holism is the inoculation of the regenerative log, right? If you think about mushroom farming, you have these logs and you inoculate it with mushroom, right? Mushroom spores. They're the potential of mushrooms, right? They're the spores, the reproductive organisms of the mushrooms, but they need the log to flourish. We need our log. That makes sense, but we have to start from the soul to get to the soil. We have to start with the inoculant, right? Which is the relationship, the why.
That passage you read, it's funny that you read that because that's one of the passages that I have highlighted that I was going to mention, but now that you've already read it, I won't. But it seems, throughout the passages I was reading, the one you just read, there's the critique, the way that I pictured it was there are people that are very hyper-focused on carbon sequestration, for example, and not all of the other magnitude of indicators of ecosystem health, like the water and the wildlife and the diversity and, everything else that exists in a healthy ecosystem. And we've kind of reduced the infinite complexity of life down to a singular piece, which is carbon. So we're only doing this because it sequesters carbon. Versus what I read is there are so many more reasons to do this, and that is because this is life. The natural world is a living system, and because it is alive, it deserves to be honored and cared for, and we all need to have a reverence for it and do what is best to that natural world. Not because it can produce X amount of carbon credits or because I can grow X many pounds of beef that can, feed, my family and whatever. Like those are all necessary and good and, things that we're not critiquing at all, but those should not be the drivers of why we do the things we do and why, all the folks around the Savory Global Network or any land manager around the globe should be doing what they do. It is that, we as humans have co-evolved with the land. We have been on this planet for, evolving for 2 million years. For most of that time as hunter-gatherers, and then 10,000 years ago, we had the advent of agriculture. And then only in the last 200 years or so have we really had this industrial revolution. And, that has really led to this separation between urban and rural communities. And we've kind of disconnected from the land in many contexts, becoming, I think what many are saying, and is true, the most ecologically illiterate society that's ever lived on this planet. And that's not to criticize people, but rather to say, we have disconnected from our co-evolved past with the land. And because of that, we are often operating from a place that does not have the natural world, deep in our core, driving all the actions that we do just out of a reverence and appreciation for this natural world around us, for the abundance that it provides and the life that it gives to us and to everyone and everything else. That's kind of what I read out of that. And I don't know if you have anything more, if that sparks anything in you.
That was beautiful. I'm just going to accept this light, by the way. I'm going all in.
Do it, man.
All in here. Well, first and foremost, I think you're absolutely right. Wendell Berry in his book, The Unsettling of America, has this really interesting part where he's talking with this businessman that lives in a city. And this illustrates your point. The businessman was saying, hey, listen, I make, let's just say, millions of dollars a year, and I have everything that I ever wanted. My children go to great schools, right? And he just starts to talk about his success in life. And don't get me wrong, that is success. In many ways, he is successful, and I'm very sure that he's very good at what he does. But then Barry looks at him and he goes, but can you feed yourself? Because if you can't, everything that you've created is artificial, right? If life lives on life and death is really life because it refeeds life, right? This is the regenerative cycle: birth, growth, life, death, rebirth. Without rebirth, there is no cycle. And in that way, life lives on life. Then the feeding of a living species is life itself. So if you can't feed yourself, do you have life, right? This is what Wendell Berry really questions in this chapter in that book. It has nothing to do with this book, but it's an amazing book. Let me read this, and this also attacks what you said. This webinar is transforming into like a reading out loud session, which is awesome. totally fine with me.
Daniel Firth Griffith. I hope everyone's enjoying it.
But this is at the end of the Wilding chapter, and it says, "We have been told that we are crazy. That is fine. In fact, we are okay with crazy. The results speak for themselves. A whole volume could be written on the emergent and truly unbelievable abundance that followed our decision to rewild. But this little book of stories will have to do, for I'm too lazy to write anything larger. In addition, I've purposely," and this is the point that illustrates, "in addition, I have purposely strayed away from explicating our increased breed back percentages, improved finishing weights, decreased lamb and calf mortality, overall farm business profitability, and lifestyle peace in service of the view that those items are secondary to the journey itself. Do not lose control in order to harvest increased productivity or profit. Lose control because you have no right to hold on to it." Right? That, in my opinion, is what we're really talking about, right? It's working with nature because you have no right to do anything else. In the book, I challenge, so my history is in actually mathematics and history. It's what I studied in college. And I kind of have this weird, both sides of my brains, both firing at high levels. I was a Calc 3 tutor in college, and I also graduated at the top of my class in history. So like I've always kind of been a torn individual. Well, anyways, I'm not a big Locke fan, John Locke. I think he's brilliant in many ways. He has some iffy things when it comes down to understanding natural rights, in my humble and honest opinion. But in the book, in the very beginning, I talk about this without bringing Locke up, but I say there's a difference between having a right of property, which is something that Locke developed. And we see this in American democracy and constitutional republicanism. And I agree with that. We do have a right to property. James Madison said that right of property is most important in our head, our conscience, right? That we can believe what we want to believe. That's undoubtedly, one of the more crucial aspects of any free people, to be able to think what you want to think. I believe that. The issue is we have taken that same idea, a right of property, from the realm of thought, right, and political citizenship, and we've extended it too far. We've gone too far in the natural world to think that just because I own this apple tree, that I can do anything I want with it. But if that apple tree is animate, meaning that it is a child of creation in the same sense that I'm a child of creation, then I can't. In fact, the only right I have to the tree is to have a relationship with it, which is management, it's partnership, it's stewardship. There is no control in this, right? It's the difference between these words and control. So maybe that's a quicker, easier way to understand it.
Yeah, well, and I think that brings up, the nuance of the discussion between, what is the difference between management and control versus fully wild, which, this is a question we've got from Scott on YouTube. Is there really a separation between managed and wild landscapes? Isn't it all nature?
Yes, that's a great question. It's a great question because the answer is yes. There is, the last, isn't it all nature? Absolutely, right? And that's the perspective that we're trying to get to, right? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people today, for ill, see a managed farm as different than going for a walk in the woods. So for instance, maybe this is helpful, and I love doing this thought exercise with people when we do courses and trainings on our farm. Obviously we're a Savory hub. We do courses at least once, twice a month. And so we're always teaching all these people on the farm. It's a great time. We love that context, that aspect of our context in our lives. But we love doing this thought exercise with these students, especially when it comes down to rewilding, wildland type enterprises, farms, call them, just for the sake of argument. But I want everybody just to close their eyes, and I want them to visit a farm. And it could be their farm, it could be a neighbor's farm, it could be their favorite farm. Maybe it's Will Harris's White Oak Pasture. That's where I'm at in my head. Great farm, and fellow Savory Hub leader down in South Georgia. And I want you to go through, I want you to walk in the farm office, and I want you to walk in and find somebody and say, I want to follow you for a day. And I want them to take your hand, and I want you to follow them for the day. Go through the farm chores, muck the stalls, move the cows, right? Shear the sheep or clip their toes. Just you go through a whole day's worth of farm work. And then I want you to end the day, say thank you, part ways. And I want you to call me. And I'm going to ask you one question. And that question is, in one word, describe your day. One word. And a lot of the times what people say is it was hard. It was dirty. There was way too much manure. It was tumultuous. It never stopped. It was painful. It was amazing, but also very dirty, right? There's aspects of this environment that are wonderful and great, right? And those all should be praised and highlighted, and they're beautiful. They're a huge part of my daily life, right? This morning I got up and I moved the cows, and I moved the sheep, then I fed the pigs, and I should have probably moved the pigs, but I decided I was going to move them tomorrow, right? And then I watered the garden and I pulled some weeds, right? This is farming in many ways, right? You're not going to get around this, even if you're rewilding farming like we are.
It's tiring. That's the word that came to mind for me.
I like it. Tiring. As somebody who hasn't had a vacation in over 4 years, right, just working the farm, I can tell you tiring is a very great word. But anyways, now I want you to redo this thought experiment, close your eyes, and I want you to come to our wildland, and I want you to wear your boots, and I want you to walk with me in the woods for an entire day. I want you to climb this hill. I want you to walk through the valley, look to your left. There's an owl. You can't see it, but it can see you. Right, we're listening to birds. I'm hearing a thrush right now. It's a bird that I heard this morning. It was gorgeous. I think it was a thrush. But anyways, walk through this day, do the exact same thing that we just did, end the day, part ways, and I want you to call me. What is a word that you would tell me? You wouldn't say tiring. You might say, my legs are tired. But tiring is an entirely different verb than the sentence, or meaning in the verb than the sentence, my legs would be tired. It's healing, it's peaceful, it's rejuvenating, it's restorative, it's even regenerative. It's blah, 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 right? It's spiritual. These are all words that very few people would put in the day-to-day farming life. And so when we're thinking about farming versus wilding, when we're thinking about management versus control, when we're thinking about all of life, what this book's about and what my life at Timshel Wildland is all about is unifying the farm landscape with the natural to create something that is purely natural, right? It's a very abundant state. Yes, we process cattle and pigs and chickens and sheep, and we harvest from the gardens. And don't get me wrong, the majority of the plants we grow in the gardens are perennials. My favorite is a thing called groundnut, the only perennial crop that the indigenous peoples of this area, the Monacan people, actually cultivated. It's called the Afton groundnut. It tastes like a potato, and the leaves taste like spinach. It's a great plant.
Oh, wow.
Comes from the area. Well, anyways, yeah, okay. So we have a little bit more wild type gardens, right? It's not 100-foot rows, 30 inches wide with 18-inch pathways where we're using like transplanter. Like, we're not doing that. That's not my style of farming. That would never fit my context. Yours, great, not mine. But at the same time, what we're trying to do is unify these landscapes. So at the end of the day, when I open my eyes and I look at my wife or my 3 kids, I could say, this day healed me. I'm tired. My legs hurt. Maybe I, last night I cut my finger pretty good. So like, things happen, but like, it was a spiritual journey. It was peaceful in the sense of the spiritual, in the soul. My arms might be tired, but my soul is rejuvenated. That's the kind of farming that we want to nurture in our wildland.
Yeah. And I think, with, so managed and wild landscapes, isn't that all nature? I think if you're doing it right, and if you're coming from the right place with it, then it should be all the same thing. When the Europeans started, crossing the United States and, discovering all of these wild landscapes, what they were discovering were actually very actively managed landscapes. And there was all that abundance because of the active management from the indigenous populations that had lived here in harmony with the land for millennia. And, it was taken for granted, I think, by the colonial folks, saying that, this is just the bounty that we now get to harvest and extract from because, we discovered it, which is the unfortunate way in which, the world was originally conceived. And because of that, what has resulted there is then this sense of conservation and preservation, which takes a very hands-off approach because it assumes that human intervention must automatically destroy the ecosystem and destroy any aspect of natural beauty and wildness that a landscape has. And, I think that's entirely incorrect. It's if you're approaching that from a mindset of this is a land that has resources that I deserve, I have a right to extract from, and I have a right to take from without giving anything back to, yeah, the outcome of that is going to be the land is going to get worse and worse over time. The natural world is going to, become destroyed, as we have seen over the last, couple generations. Versus
it's the difference between the right of relationship and the right to property, right? The right of relationship, the word is of, right? And the right to property, the word is to. And you can't confuse them, right? We have a right to property in the sense that we have a right to have a relationship with it. Right. And that's exactly what you're talking about.
But a relationship is give and take. It's not just take.
It's a gift. In the book, I say relationships are gifts. They're nothing more. They have to be given, right? There has to be community. You have to have communion, right? In a very spiritual sense with the natural world. And I'm not saying, you don't have to go do forest bathing or do yoga or meditation outside. If you want to, great. If that's your context and that's what gives you the community and the communion, do it. Right? Find your own way. But the point is you have to have a communion with the natural world in order to have a relationship with it, right? Because communion creates community, which fosters relationship, which fosters abundance. That abundant state is where we can start entering the house, right? Pick up the, first how-to book you can find on Amazon and start reading it and devouring it. It's great. Just don't, I always have this joke, the Water for Every Farm by P.A. Yeomans. I've never gotten past page 145. It's like the keyline design manual. Yeah. If you can get past page 145, you need to write the book.
Is there something about page 145 that is
it just gets so heavy? You're just reading, you're just like, wow. I don't know why I said that, but it's funny regardless. The point is start with community. Right? Communion, community, relationship, then regeneration. When you walk through that step, I was looking at this and I think I put it up and then I put it down. But Dan Flores is a beautiful author. He wrote American Serengeti.
Yep.
Yeah.
America.
Yeah. Both really good books. But anyways, in this book here, I quote him and I say, I think the actual quote, I'm trying to find it so I don't butcher it, but I'm going to butcher it anyways. Western civilization has been a meat grinder, I think is the way he says it. And I love that quote because to consume life by first killing it, right? This is the regenerative cycle, right? Life lives on life. The cow kills the grass in order to eat it, right? In order to feed itself. What happens? That grass regrows, right? That's the soil food web. That's grazing ecology. Not a part of this conversation, but a wonderful conversation to have. But that's life living on life, right? In order for life to live, death has to occur. And so a meat grinder, though, is a very different word or a different way of understanding life living on life. A meat grinder is negative, right? It's controlling, it's domineering, right? It's kingship over something to shove it through something that just grinds it up, right? There's no selfhood after, right? When you look at ground beef, tell me where the ground beef came out of the cow, right? But when you look at a porterhouse or you look at a chuck roast or a flat iron steak or a flank steak, I mean, you know where it came out of, right? It still looks like it needs to have looked from that part of the cow. It's processed a little bit in the sense that it's not a chunk of meat, right? These aren't primal cuts, but in the sense that we can tell what it is, right? But the word meat grinder takes the selfhood out of it. It throws the cow through this thing and it produces something that's indistinguishable, right? Not saying don't eat ground beef, love ground beef. But
I thought that's what you were saying. I was like, that's mostly what I get when I buy.
Yeah. Well, when you're a really good cook, the ground beef is some of the best beef, in my opinion, to get. As a farmer, I'll speak to this. Like, there's so many different recipes, right? Like, you can only cook a steak, in my opinion, one way, right? With a lot of fat and at high heat and then slow over time. But like ground beef, you can do a lot of things with. The point is selfhood. The point is that the word he chooses, meat grinder, describes the lack of selfhood, right? The lack of understanding of community, of relationship. And so the idea is not to kill. The idea is not to kill, right? It's not to not eat carrots or cows. In the book, by the way, there's a whole chapter dedicated to asking the question, why do we, talk about killing cows as a bad thing? We eat carrots and those carrots eat the dead cows. This doesn't make any sense. I'll let you read the book. The point is life feeds life, and it's not a meat grinder, right? It's a dining room table where there's just so many chairs because of community. And the chairs aren't just human beings, by the way. Right? If you're truly living in the community of the natural world, if you have a relationship with your land base and the food that comes out of it, you realize that your dining room table, life is there, right? Your neighbors are there, your human neighbors, right? You're fostering actual community by food, and that's beautiful. You're pulling everybody up together by feeding them and nourishing them and creating the community and communion around it. But the life is also on the table, right? The carrots on the table were living forms that are now giving you more life. And we need to focus on that just for a moment.
Yeah, it's having that reverence and respect for all that is given and all that, we are and where it comes from and what we will eventually become, because,
Right.
we are not, excluded from those laws of nature. We too will die and will become part of the land, and that will become new life for many others. And the cycle will
Right.
go on and on and on. Yeah. The relationship is beautiful. I want to pivot a little bit. I know we're getting to the top of the hour, but I'm cool to keep this conversation going just because I love talking to you, and I see we've
I'm
got folks
suntanning.
engaged.
I'm
And as long as questions keep coming in from YouTube and Facebook, we're going to keep talking.
Cool.
So let's pivot a little bit to more of the tactical of who you are and what you've got going on at Timshel. So Brandy asks, you've got 400 acres and a variety of animals. What are your main streams of revenue? And I would expand that to, not just what are your streams of revenue, but what are the enterprises that, you have developed? And, specifically, I'm thinking of the Commonwealth network that you're developing. Speak a little bit to all the different pieces that are at play there in the Central Virginia region that you've got going right now.
Right. So, so the enterprises that we have on our farm, right, the different drivers of ecosystem succession and function are cattle, pigs, and sheep. The main, if I had to pick a main source of revenue or a main source of focus, it is the cattle. It's something that we focus on. They are really, in our opinion, the true and primary drivers of succession. We see pigs in their natural role as foragers, right? They're the resetters of ecosystem function. If we have an environment that is going in a particular direction, a successional direction, and definitely a more diverse direction, but we want to reset that, right? To see where else maybe we can take it, we bring in the pigs. So that's their role. The sheep are really browsers in the sense that they clean up behind the cattle. They love the shrubs and the forages and the forbs and the sedges much more than the cows do. And so we're able to more uniformly graze our landscape in the sense of actually utilizing the life that's there to feed more life. I don't really care to have a golf green type farm where everything is utilized and is beautiful and all the manure patterns are exactly 3 feet apart from each other. Maybe some people do. I just have a bunch of different species in the farm so that life is feeding life. Any life that dies and it doesn't feed life, and this goes back to Alan Savory's initial, key insights all the way through his ecosystem processes, which is holistic management. Is that standing life, right? That's not actually trampled or consumed and fermented into manure or just basically turned into new life, is in many ways wasted life, right? And that's really an interesting analogy if you step back and apply that to your own life, right? If your life isn't contributing to the greater life of the community, is it life, right? That's a really interesting question. I'm not going to answer it. I'll let you answer it. You, as in everybody listening. It's way too big for me. But anyway, so that's our systems in general. Really quick to set a context for Timshel Wildland, where we are, from a community or biome perspective, our wildland, our farm, if you will, is nestled into the temperate climate mixed oak broadleaf forest biome. A lot of our farm is forest cover, and even the pastures that we have, we're trying to turn them into a mixed shrubland, into a silvopasture type endeavor. I bring this up to say that the reason the book is named Wildflowers is our environment, right? The mixed oak broadleaf forest biome is what I call the forest of flowers. All of the native, or I like to say indicative species of our area, from trees to shrubs to grasses to ground covers, even to grasses, are flowering species, right? From laurels to locusts to wildflowers to hackberries and everything else. Dogwoods, and it's just a beautiful place in the spring. Everything is flowers, and it's a wild land. So wild like flowers was born. Shifting now, but just to answer your question succinctly, so you have it, we make most of our money off of cattle. That's really what we sell the most of. Shifting because the wildlands context begins to become molded into the Regenerative Institute, our hub, with Savory, within the Savory network, right here in the middle ground, which is what we call the Commonwealth Network. And so I'll talk about that just a little bit. But so the Commonwealth Network is an extension of our work via the Robinia Institute. It's really where this work falls. I think many today are trying to solve the regenerative movement's issues by establishing processing networks or distribution channels, organizations. I mean, we have Rep Provisions, Eric Perner, brilliant, awesome gentleman. He runs 4P Ranch in the Oklahoma hub within the Savory network. He has Rep Provisions, a great company. But where we felt like our niche was, right? Nature abhors, what is Will Harris's line? Nature abhors a vacuum.
Abhors the monoculture.
A monoculture. Where we felt like we were going to fit in is actually by producing a producer network, by creating a community of folks. That's what we're really driven by, is community. If you haven't told this by now, but we wanted to create a producer network, a community of folks helping other folks to actually not only solidify the regenerative impact in communities, but scale it, right? Like, I haven't looked recently, but the regenerative agriculture exists in like what, point some percent of the greater agricultural movement today. We are this small. And so if we really are to tackle, in reverse desertification and stop erosion and species extinction and pollution and climate change, we have to get a little bit bigger than this, right? So scaling is really important. But how do you scale? You scale, in my honest opinion, through community. And so we felt like it was our context to start at the community and the community function level, right? Going back to the very beginning, start with the soul and expand to the soil. So what if, we ask these questions, but like, what if soil is the byproduct of healthy community function, right? What if soil-based carbon sequestration was a product of healthy relationships within resilient systems? And up until now, we're thinking ecologic natural systems like the soil food web. But the Commonwealth Network, we add in the human element. What if carbon sequestration was possible in a climate resolution type sense through actually building resilient communities of human beings? Not just of making sure that in your pastures, right, you have warm season grasses and cool season grasses and perennials and forbs and annuals and ground covers and bunch grasses and runner grasses. But what if we see that same thing writ in the human community as well? What sort of abundance might occur? So anyways, Commonwealth Network is a community network based in the triad of what we see true wealth to be. It's money, mentorship, and markets. And so I'll quickly talk about those things. Money. So the Commonwealth Network, money. So we've developed and are currently piloting large-scale regenerative capital investments to empower farmers to undergo the transition or scaling process. So for instance, if you need $20,000 to transition your set stocked fields with perimeter fences, sorry, I'm speaking ahead of myself. If you need $20,000 to transition your set stocked fields, right, that currently have perimeter fences and one watering point, but to facilitate that transition, right, we need a couple interior fencing, maybe you need some polywire. Dare I bring up the word polywire in this conversation?
You said to leave it at the door, but here
I
you
know,
brought it up again.
and it's here. But like, there's some things that are needed, different watering setups, because if you have a 50-acre field and one watering point, it's very hard to manage that holistically in any sort of rotational sense. And so we come in and we bring the capital to make that transition or scaling process happen. The beautiful thing here that I would love to share is we don't stop at the financial or federal dollar side of the capital. We go a step further, something we're piloting that there'd be much more data and news in the future as this pilot starts to expand, but it's through actually donating livestock, right? Not just giving money to a system to have a transition or scale, but like, let's say that you own 100 acres, but the only financials you have ever had access to only got you, 10 cows, right? But to really regenerate the landscape, you need a couple more than 10, right? This is the herd effect. We need hooves on the soil. We need manure and trampling and everything else. We need more animals to be regenerative. What if we could just give you the animals? Grass genetics that were solid and healthy and firm, that thrived on grass to get you going, right? Instead of giving you actual financial capital, what if we just give you grass genetics as a complete donation, as a commonwealth, right? If regeneration is our commonwealth and we're only going to succeed if we form communities, then let's form communities, right? And that's the beautiful thing. We're piling that up program, and there'd be a lot more data in the future. And then real quickly, mentorship and markets. I have it written down here in these 3 points because I'll always forget. I'll go off on a tangent this way, just the way my mind works. Mentorship. So let's see, through this system, we also spend time educating and consulting with the farm and the farm business to make sure that less mistakes are made, right? Landscapes are actually managed holistically, right? And plans are in place to make sure the vision, the context set in the beginning actually meets the reality of an abundant future, right? We all have dreams that we want to run a multi-species farm. And then you realize when you get up in the morning, you have to move the pigs, move the sheep, move the cattle, move the chickens, right? Then feed them. And it's noon and you haven't even seen breakfast yet, right? And so what we have to do is get a plan in place to make sure that our context meets reality. And that's also really important from the transition side, right? Creating a 10-year project or plan to actually undergo this regenerative transition. Maybe it's a 1,000-acre row crop farm, right? So undergoing that transition from sprays and chemical agriculture to no-till drills, right? And cover crops and animals grazing standing forage, that doesn't happen day one. We need a plan. And so the education and consulting is there as well. Huge fun side. Most of the farms that have joined into the Commonwealth have become APs, accredited professionals with the Savory Institute. So they get in this consulting and the education, and they raise their hand. They're like, I want more. And then they get much, much more, 10 days more worth of training. It's a beautiful process.
Yeah. And accredited professionals, for people that don't know, are the educators within the Savory Global Network. So, Daniel is a Savory hub representing the Virginia region. And, within the Savory hubs, there are accredited educators. And so, that's kind of a career track that's offered for people that are interested in doing that and looking to offer those types of services and, use the curriculum and programs that the Savory Institute provides. So, it's kind of cool to see people enter in from, I want to manage my land better. But then, they get so deep in it and they're like, man, I want to help others do the same.
Exactly.
And that's that relationship piece, the cyclical nature, the regeneration that, this whole network is all about. There's, 48 Savory Institute hubs all across the globe, Daniel being one of them. All of them have very different contexts and different impact models and business models and ways that they are approaching building regenerative capacity within their bioregion. And, that's intentionally done so. The traditional NGO model is to come in, set up field offices and kind of have this top-down approach that says, this is the thing you're going to do and here's the funding to do it. And you're going to appreciate us and say thank you for the things that we provide. But that's not how nature works.
Right.
So, at the Savory Institute, our impact model is, kind of flipped on its head and, kind of tongue in cheek, but it's very grassroots. And it relies on that peer-to-peer support from folks in their region. So, people in Virginia, producers in Virginia want to talk to a fellow producer in Virginia who knows the soil and the markets and the local policies and, all the different factors at play. Because, the Savory Institute, we're 12 employees, most of us in Colorado, but we work all across the globe. We don't know what is needed in Central Virginia, but Daniel does. And Daniel knows how to do that. And so we put faith in Daniel and the rest of all of the Savory Hub leaders to be able to develop these really novel concepts like the Commonwealth Network, which is bringing in, finance and animals and, mentorship and, markets through the Land to Market program and EOV and, bringing all the different things together and, to play this game of Tetris to figure out like what is needed to build capacity in that region and truly help people out. So I think it's a really beautiful thing you're doing out there. And I saw one question from Regeneratarianism. I think that's Stephen. He says, being in Virginia, do you have any thoughts on discussions pertaining to the advantages or disadvantages of more communal operations versus more traditional family-based operations? And I think, not to speak for Stephen here, but I think what he's getting at, I think he's asking a question of the co-op model that Sylvan Aqua Farms is doing, they're neighbors of yours in Virginia. And, I'll let you speak to it, but, my personal opinion is I think we need as many models as possible. Just like a living system, there is a biodiversity of species in our, in the regenerative movement, in land management in general, in our food sheds. We need a diversity of approaches that are all moving the ball forward together at the same time. And some are going to be able to tackle certain issues and others are going to be able to tackle other issues. And it doesn't mean that there is one single solution that is needed for everything. I think we need to celebrate all the different models that are being brought forward. And, I know that I regularly pay attention to what Sylvan Aqua and Chris Newman are putting out. And I think it's great. And I love that they are challenging the norms and trying to put out something new. And, I think when you're making people angry at times, I think you're probably onto something. So I applaud them for that, for, really challenging the status quo of what is going on. But to me, I think what I see is multiple models emerging in this mid-Atlantic region. And I think that is a beautiful thing. And if it's viewed in this lens of competition, I think that's unfortunate. And I think that is not the right way to perceive it. I believe that cooperation and celebration of, yes, that's amazing that they're doing that. And yes, that's amazing that Daniel's doing this. And yes, it's amazing that so-and-so is doing this. And more so when you approach life from this scarcity mindset of, it is us versus them and tribalism, and it is a net zero, some game that is only going to create winners and losers out of the equation. And that is not what life is. Life is not all about reaching a certain endpoint and, claiming the top of the hill and saying, I am the king of the mountain. It is, cooperation, it's community, it's life, it's all these things that we've been talking about throughout this entire interview. I was actually thinking if we go back and read a transcript of this interview later on, I want to count how many times we've said life and relationship and community. Probably a lot. Probably a lot. Yeah. Those are my thoughts. I think the more folks, pushing new models, trying new things out, the better. I think that's absolutely necessary, especially in the realms that Sylvan Aqua is pushing it forward with. So, I commend them, and I commend you, Daniel, and I commend everyone that's out there, trying to develop something that is better than what is currently out there.
I think I agree with everything you said. There's something that not many people know. It's not private. It's just never really been public. But when we started our farm, my wife and I, we owned at that time about 290 some acres. Same farm. We just have acquired land since. And we didn't really have the animals that we needed to graze it properly. And we were sitting back and we were trying to run the finances to understand, okay, how can we build this farm? It was a new farm. We'd never really been farmed in the last 10 years. And so it was overgrown. Again, it's a chapter of the book, our tackling of that overgrowth. But we didn't have the financial capital to really invest into building herds and flocks and things. And it's funny, right at that time, a family literally on Easter Day showed up at our doorstep. They were in a camper. It was a husband and wife, and I think they had 4 kids at the time. I think they have 6 now. But I think they had 4 kids at the time, all like 10 and under. And they said, hey, listen, the farm that we were managing for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years went under due to some legal issues, and we had to get off the farm ASAP. So we bought this camper, and we're looking for a place. And for the next, I think it was a year, about 10 to 12 months, they lived on our farm, absolutely free. They farmed, they brought animals with them, herds of cattle, and I think they had like 200 ewes in the flock that they brought. Mm-hmm. They had chickens, and I think they brought even turkeys. Well, anyways, they farmed, right? And it was me and the gentleman name was Fred, really, really great people, good friends, just out of the blue needed help, right? And what we found in this relationship was they supplied what I couldn't yet have. And we supplied what they couldn't yet have, right? That's community, right? Nothing was exchanged, right? It was somebody in need, but we were also in need. There was need going both ways, and that is in many ways what community is, right? We all have needs, and we all have the solvents, the solutions, the life for everybody else's needs, right? That system worked really well. They were able to keep farming, invest their money or save their money so they could invest. Now they farm 200 acres just down the road. A great, great story, a huge highlight of my life when I look back over the years, spending this year with this awesome family. They taught us, we taught them. It was great. I think this model is beautiful. I think that if there is a future to farming, especially regenerative farming, It's not one where family farms go like this, right? This doesn't make sense anymore, right? We have to open our hands, and every context is different, right? Chris Newman at Sylvanaqua, I think his opinions and beliefs and the writings that I've read are brilliant, right? I think he has a lot of really good things to say, but like what you're saying, that there's a different context for everything, right? This family that I'm talking about with the husband named Fred and Amber was the couple. What they needed, what we needed at that time was this, right? Any sort of other relationship wouldn't have worked, right? It needed to fit both of our contexts. And it was deeply regenerative for our community, right? Our landscape, our community, and also our friendship. Continuing on, I think if regeneration is anything, regeneration is hope, which is in the book, this verbiage. Regeneration is hope only if it is first a relationship. Right. And so what we're really talking here is not some hippy dippy, not some forest bathing. And by the way, I see myself as hippy dippy and I'm a forest bather. So take these things positively. But like, it's not some hippy dippy forest bathing relationship and community with the natural world. I'm talking about community and relationship with all life. Right. We have to open our lenses. We have to see the needs of our community. And in many ways, it is today the BIPOC community. Absolutely. Right? This is no doubt what we need to be focusing on. No doubt whatsoever. And at the same time, Fred and Amber needed help. Right? So we have to help them as well. Help is needed. Community is needed. Relationship is needed. And it's not a hippy dippy relationship. It's a relationship with all life. That is the solution to the regenerative movement. And to note, I agree. This isn't verbatim word for word, but I agree with Chris's rhetoric that the regenerative movement is in many ways in a bad place. Right? We've focused on no-till drills, right? We've focused on polywire, and for good reason. I think we've built something unbelievable, right? To be able to take animals and to regenerate landscapes via herding or polywire. This is brilliant, but we have to stop. We have to stop doing, we have to start being, if only for the moment. And this is why I wrote the book, right? We are at a pivotal spot in our cultural history, right? 2020 and 2021 between Black Lives Matter, BIPOC, and the coronavirus, COVID-19, right? This is causing us to change our lifestyles, to re-envision what's coming out of our soul to affect the soil. Very, very important and really important conversations to have. And that's why I wrote the book. And I keep stressing this, but the whole book is built so that, it's poetic and there's quote. It's a fun book, right? You've read it. I think it's enjoyable. It's not too overpowering, but at the same time, it is written to overpower you in the sense that we got to start focusing on the soil and start focusing on the soul.
Yeah. Well, and I think, there's a big drive for people, now that regenerative is becoming this very mainstream term. You see corporations jumping in, you see financial institutions jumping in, you see media jumping in. Everyone wants to get a slice of this. Everyone wants to be a part of this movement because they see the momentum that is picking up behind it. Yeah. But in that fervor, people are latching on to specific practices and saying, okay, well, all you got to do is no-till and cover crops, or all you got to do is rotational grazing, or all you have to do is X, Y, and Z. And they focus on that individual piece without doing the foundational work. Right. In holistic management, I like to think of it as, there's the grazing component, holistic planned grazing. You map out all the moves of your animals, you match the forage availability to how many animals you have and their needs and the grass recovery rates. You put all of that and you plan your grazing. That's all well and good. But that's a planning procedure. Like anyone can do this planning procedure, and we've got it in the holistic
step-by-step instructions.
Exactly. Yep. You can see exactly how it's done. But if you don't have the right mindset and you don't have the right intentionality of why you are doing this, if you don't have that holistic perspective of how everything in the world is interconnected and that how you manage your animals on your land affects the health of those animals and then the people that have that food and then the downstream effects of any erosion or the glyphosate you spray and like all the different things that are factored in and, everything that comes out of that, you need to acknowledge your role in the interconnectedness of this and the infinite complexity of living systems that, people want to reduce the complexity of the living world down to a simple thing of rotational grazing or no-till or cover crops or biochar or whatever it may be. And it's
this one thing that's going to save the world, right?
Yeah.
That's Elon Musk's opinion. It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
But then you wonder why in academic settings you get people that say, well, we tested out, management intensive, short duration, grazings, and we found
in
that
this one area, in this one context,
this one
with
indicator that we were studying versus the other. It's like, well, yeah, of course it didn't work in that tightly controlled experimental range because that wasn't realistic to the real world. There weren't variables at play. You didn't have people that were making decisions that were trying to get the best outcomes for the land and the animals and the people and, everything involved. And when you look at academic papers that studied real life practitioners and the real world results rather than trying to control all the variables in this very academic, experimental setting, you get very, very different results. And I think it's the same thing. I was reading an article the other day that was talking about the excitement behind cover crops. And the outcome of this is that the aquatic life was all getting destroyed because everyone's rushing to plant cover crops because they're like, oh, regenerative's the thing. So all I got to do is go plant cover crops and now I'm regenerative. Cool. Yeah, I'm going to call myself a regenerative farmer. And it's like, well, no, regenerative means the land is getting better and, you're giving more than your more comes out than what you put in and, all that sort of stuff. But people think it's just, oh, I do this practice and therefore I am regenerative. Well, no, because now people are going out and putting cover crops, but they're still terminating by spraying. And then that is leaching out into the waterways. And they're like, well, but I'm still regenerative because I did the thing that you said I should do. And it's like, man, if you didn't get it, practices and that's it, and you don't focus on the mindset and the ethos behind what is being done and having that reverence for life and that appreciation and connection to place and what does that place need. It's the same thing as people going out and, you see, very well-intentioned organizations that are going out and just planting trees everywhere. And then what happens is you see them like a decade later and these trees are all withering away because they went and planted trees in a place that ecologically did not want to be forest. It can't support forests and it's not ecologically appropriate for it. And so there's this, you need to understand the context of what it is that you're managing and what it wants to be. It's not what you want it to be. It's what the landscape wants to be. And you need to nurture that and do what you can to honor that and bring that about to the best of your ability, given, your context.
Right. I was talking with this guy and actually, I think if I'm scanning this system right, I think it's a question. You're like, what's the first step? Like, how do you do this? What's the first step? You go out in the pasture, you ask, what do you want to be? Right? Just like you're saying there, do you want a tree or do you want something else? Right? The difference between management and control, the idea, right, is very easy to think you're just sitting in the co-pilot seat, right? Directing symbiosis and synergies for future abundance via the drivers of ecosystem succession, the animals, the cattle, the sheep, the pigs, the chickens. But sitting in that co-pilot seat is you looking at the pasture and asking, what do you want to be, right? Come up with your favorite cocktail mix that you're going to no-till drill right into your spring pastures for that growth, right? You're like, okay, this is it. Like Gabe Brown, he has an amazing cocktail mix that he talks about in his book, Dirt to Soil, an unbelievable book. Gabe is brilliant. But even he talks about this relationship, but it's the idea of walking out and asking, let's just change the subject to an apple tree because, well, it looks like an apple tree. It's actually a red maple, but it's right outside the window. It's growing like an apple tree. It's so cool. What do you want to be? How do you want to grow? And then learning, because it's not going to answer, right? You don't speak apple tree. Again, this is not before bathing, but it's about that humility by simply lowering your standard. Right? Your big chest, I'm a human being, the controller and eradicator of wilderness. But lowering that, right? Lowering your chest, becoming humble enough to ask that question is everything. That doesn't have to respond because it already responded. That humility is where we need to begin, right? And anyways, I wanted to read this quote. It's on page 97 of the book. It goes back to what you were saying. Again, read aloud with Daniel Firth Griffith. But Sometimes the very best way to graze is to overgraze. To manage holistically means, on occasion, to not move your animals. It depends on the occasion. The fulcrum of all decision making is context and freedom, not weaning weights and pasture utilization. Right? So many of us who attend, I call it YouTube University, right? The product coming out of that is accidental abundance, right? Like I was teaching a course last week, and he actually, Drew, if you're on this, hope you're well. I made the comment, and I think it really stuck. I hope it did. Drew, send me an email if it didn't, but because it needs to. It's brilliant. I mean, it's brilliant in the sense that its impact is massive, not because I came up with it. Because I didn't.
Talk about humility, yeah.
Because I didn't come up with it. That's the point. And now I'm lost where I am. Accidental abundance. If you move your cows a day because YouTube told you to, anything that good happens is accidental. You're not managing for anything. You're managing for practice, which is nothing at all, right? Sometimes the best way to graze is to overgraze, but you knew that beforehand, right? That's the brilliance of holistic planned grazing. That's the brilliance of ecological monitoring, meeting your holistic context. It's the brilliance of the entire whole of what holistic management is. It's that you plan for it. You manage for what you want, not what you don't want, right? That's what Alan says in his book. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Accidental abundance is not planning for what you want because it's accidental. You have to establish what you want and then manage for that. And the brilliant thing, and this is what Daniela Howell and I have had many conversations. Daniela is the CEO and co-founder of Savory, right?
Yep.
You can't have a context that's degenerative. I don't think it's possible. I personally don't, and I think Daniela agrees with me. I'll let her come on. She's watching somewhere. She's just amazing. The point is, you can't have a context that's degenerative. So in the end, you're still going to be regenerative by managing holistically. You'll get there. But for instance, where I read this quote in the book, we were moving the herd to rejoin two different herds that were separated due to an accident, a very painful and nearly deadly accident. And the two herds separated. And for the whole summer, they were separate herds. But we brought them back together in a place that I knew they were going to overgraze it. They were going to lose body condition, right? Weaning, finishing weights were going to decrease. We were about to finish a bunch of cows. This makes no farm business sense, right? Why would you want a month before an animal's processed to lose weight every single day for a week straight? It's because our context demanded it. We were trying to rebuild community that a big accident, a nearly deadly accident, had created. And that's much more important to me on this day and this moment, according to my context and management plan, than finishing weights.
Can you speak a little bit more to what specifically was in your context, or which of the context checks caused you to make that decision? You know, I think just as like a learning exercise for folks, because I think some folks watching this video perhaps aren't as familiar with the holistic management framework of developing a holistic context. You use that to guide all decisions you make. And there are context checks that you run through quickly. There's 7 of them. But what was it about your particular holistic context that caused you to make that decision versus, what others would, have presumed you would have done?
Yeah, absolutely. So our context, and I don't have it in front of me, but basically what this aspect of our quality of life and our future resource-based behavior, which are 2 different aspects of the holistic context, both of these 2 different aspects, all part of the greater whole of what is the holistic context, they speak to the understanding that on our wildland, we foster community and we don't foster anything else. Now in practice, the way that this looks is, and this is a huge other conversation that I'm sure people are like, oh, at an hour and a half into it, he brought this up, but on our farm, we breed all of our own livestock in the sense that any calf or lamb or piglet that we finish was born on our farm. So we have all of our own breeding stock, more or less. In COVID, we bought some steers to help our community, but that's to help our community, so it still fits our context. Well, anyways, whenever an animal is born on the farm, we don't castrate, wean, or separate it ever for any reason at any time. So all boys born on the farm, all bull calves, let's say, are always bull calves until they're dead, which could be at 20 years old and it could be at 3 years old. Any calf or lamb or piglet born on the farm will never be separated from its mom for weaning and rebreeding purposes ever. They'll stay with mom until mom decides not to. My wife is a mother of 3. I've watched her raise these 3 kids. We have 3 kids, 3 and under, the love of our lives. And munchkins and nutcases, if you have 3 kids, 3 and under. It's unbelievably.
Photo on the screen of Daniel and his family,
Yes.
just to give a
Eloin,
peek at who he's
Tecumseh, and
talking about.
Sequoia. Eloin, Tecumseh, and Sequoia are their names. And that's Morgan in the background.
Beautiful.
But mommy knows best, right? I like modern feminism movement. I mean, like that is where I'm like, oh my gosh, if you've watched a woman give birth 3 different times and 4 total years, right? And she's unbelievably good at it. And she raises it like that connection she has with those children is so much more than I will ever have. It's different. It's more in a different way. I have beauty in my own sense. But anyways, the mother-child relationship is beautiful. We will never separate it. Just like I'll never separate it in the human sphere. I'll never separate it in the cattle, lamb, or piglet sphere. And then number 3 is actual like gender separation. So all boys are run with all girls at all times. We have one herd, one flock, one sounder. Is that what a pig grouping is called? I don't know. One herd of pigs. Where was I? I got lost in the Morgan picture.
I was asking you specifically about which context check, or what about your context?
Unity.
Yeah, and so it sounds like the aspect of your holistic context was that it's important to you to have to build community at every step of the way
within the herd, right?
Within the herd. Mm-hmm.
In the book, I argue this, that when Alan Savory talked about the herd effect, right? This is a key insight, a foundation of holistic management. What that also means, and it's very rarely taken this far, but it's also the fact that a unified herd has in its surroundings, but also itself. Herd effect is as much internal as it is external, right? That's not new to Alan. I guarantee he's thought about these things, but not a lot of people talk about it. The internal effect that a herd can have. This is community. And the circumstance that happened was our 2 herds separated, and some calves were weaned unexpectedly and inappropriately, right? They were separated from their mothers when this split happened, and it killed us. For months, it killed us. And we finally decided, okay, we're going to overgraze. We're going to lose body condition. We might even miss breeding back our cows, or even introducing our heifers to the breeding program, in the sense that their age was ripe and ready. By bringing them back and losing that body condition. We saw the results. We understood what might actually come about as a farm business, but I needed to reunite these families, right? That is our context. So we overgrazed. We lost body condition. We had less calves this year so far than we did last year, which is when it happened. And so, yes, we are seeing the results of our choice, but we managed for this. It was a choice that we can manage, right? And that's the beauty of it. In many ways, I mean, like, marginal reaction, you look at all those things, but gut feel, right? The last check was really the context check that drove it, right? It makes zero farm business sense. It makes, zero, marginal reaction, resource conversion. I have to look at the list. Like all of those things were negative. They're like, don't do it. Like, don't do it, right? You're overgrazing, you're losing foliage for the next growing period. You're doing all of these things, but the gut check, the gut feel said, no, our context says that we build community, and a massive accident had created disunity. We need to recreate it. And so that's what the entire chapter is about. I think it's chapter
and that's
6.
Beautiful, because it's moving forward with the intentionality that, and believe and have decided that community is important for you and all that you do on your farm, in your community, etc. So that should be a driving force of that. And so having that defined in your holistic context allowed you to use that as a guiding force, because otherwise, people chase the shiny thing, or they jump to, what their, guttural reaction is to something of like, oh, well, of course I need to, do this, that, and the other thing, without actually thinking the long term and truly what you want and what is aligned with, what is right with you and everyone else in this whole that you manage. And so, and it's not just you that came up with that holistic context. I mean, it's bringing together everyone else that is a decision maker and has veto power, and, bringing everyone to the table to develop that holistic context together, so that there is agreement that we are all working towards this common goal, this North Star that guides all the decisions we make here on this property, which, I think is the power of the holistic context. So,
absolutely
love that
After
example.
The decision, I think Abby Smith, the coordinator or director of the Jefferson Center, the Northern California hub, also the Savory. global
global
network.
coordinator for the Savory Global Network, and also herself a hub leader in Northern California. Yeah.
There you go. Marvelous human being, great friend. Cherish her every second you get of her. A great human being. But when she talks about context, right? At this one time, she was co-teaching a holistic management intensive for an AP that we had at the Savory Institute, and she was teaching the context. And she said, context is deciding beforehand what to do, so that when the decision arises, right, it's made. You still have the context checks, right? You still have to go through it. You still have to understand the marginal reactions, and is this really addressing the weak link biologically, or the weak link in resource conversion, et cetera. You still should go through these checks, at least at a topical or high level. But when we said in our context that community is the most important, when we had to weigh, do we want community or finishing weights? It was not a question. It was community. Finishing weights be damned, right? That was the option. There was no option. And that's the beauty of the holistic context.
Love it. Man, I feel like we've touched on so much, the book, language, community, life, holistic context, what's going on in Virginia, talking about the regenerative movement on the whole. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that's bubbling up for you that you feel called to talk about. And if not, otherwise, I'm just going to ask you, what are you working on next? Because I have a feeling like every time I talk to you, there's like another book in the works or another new stacked enterprise that you're figuring out how to like grow and, using this entrepreneurial spirit of yours. But, anything bubbling up for you you want to touch on before we start to close this thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're currently working on that livestock donation system. We're piloting it at pretty large scale this spring. I'm talking topically because it's not exactly all released yet. More towards April, May, we'll get some real data behind it. Real actually piloting the systems and getting the data back, which is crucial from a scientific and storytelling perspective. That system is budding and growing, and it's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Link on the screen for anyone that wants to follow along with what Daniel's doing at Timshel and this livestock donation program, regenerative finance, holistic management training, all the different services and opportunities that are being coordinated, through Daniel as a Savory Hub leader. Follow him at wildtimshel.com just to stay updated on all of that.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, we have books in the works. I'm working on 2 different books. One is a regenerative ag book. One is a regenerative ag meets early American West history book, which is going to be pretty interesting. It's from an indigenous perspective. It's more or less an indigenous perspective critiquing the regenerative movement, I think, at this point. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see how it emerges. Big into emergence. I like to start books. And that's, by the way, something we didn't talk about that I would like to mention. Yeah, I'll take 15 seconds to do it. I wrote Wildflowers. I have the book here in 3 weeks. It was a creative process that I dove into headlong, and what came out of it, I think, is very important. I hope it is well written. I definitely didn't have time to write a book, not with Sequoia being born, and we had different APs that we were training that we had to get in before the growing season ended, and I did it all at the same time, while farming and winterizing the farm and other things. But I felt like I needed to be written, and so the creative process was incredibly rich. And to be honest with you, I read the book, and I'm not from a, wow, this is good perspective, but from a like, wow, this is new to me perspective. Like I read it, I'm like, what? Okay, cool. Didn't know I said that, which is pretty special for me because we recorded the audiobook a couple weeks ago, and it's going to be released here pretty soon. And I read through it, and I felt like I was reading it for the first time. Like once I left that creative process, I left it. It was like I literally shut the book, in terms of both form and function. So just interesting notes, but that's it.
I love it. So when can we expect these next books?
Give me 3 months. I'm not going to do it in 3 weeks. I'll do it in 3 months.
Man,
how's that?
We're
3 years.
We're doing a lot more of these webinars. So, I hope folks have enjoyed this because it sounds like Daniel's going to be putting out books all the friggin' time, and I'm going to want to talk about them. Although you're probably going to have to give me some time to read them first. But for those, wondering, this is the link to go purchase the book. The book is Wild Like Flowers by Daniel Firth Griffith, Savory Hub leader out of Virginia. The link there is bit.ly/wildflowers. Oh, Daniel, your video has frozen on me.
No way.
Yeah, but I still see you.
It's the sun.
It's the sun. Yeah, it's just frozen. Oh, you were frozen with this huge grin on your face, like a Joker grin. It was actually pretty awesome.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Well, I think we're going to wrap here. Thank you to everyone who has chimed in with questions and commentary for us today. I hope it's been a valuable conversation. Just for folks that are wondering, this is being live streamed over to Facebook and YouTube, but these videos will continue to exist on Facebook and YouTube for replays after the fact. So you can go and replay these, share them around. Please do. We would greatly appreciate that. Of course, buy the book, Wild Like Flowers, bit.ly.com/wildlikeflowers. Again, here's just a quick peek at what that looks like. And anything else before we get going? Anything else you want to say?
I do. I have one thing. It's a housekeeping item. You can buy the book. If you follow that link, it'll take you to our site. You can buy the book on our site. We make the most money there, which just supports my children. That's up to you. If you want to buy it from Amazon, totally support it. But if you go to Amazon and you pick up the book and you're looking at it there's many different sellers on Amazon selling the thing. Amazon selling it, Book Depository or whatever it is selling it. But if you click on the sellers, the lowest price available is actually from the Rabinia Group, our publisher. I've signed about 5,000 copies that they're shipping out via that page. So you'll get a signed copy if you buy it from danielfirthgriffith.com, which is the bit.ly link. But if you go to Amazon, select Rabinia Group as the seller. It's free shipping. It's fast shipping. I think it's 3 days instead of 2. And it's also signed, which is so much better than getting it from Amazon Prime and supporting Bezos or Book Depository, whoever they are. So if you can remember that stuff, use it. Else, just buy the book and enjoy it.
So what you're saying is if you're going to buy the book, you have multiple choices. You can either choose Amazon Prime, free fast delivery, Jeff Bezos makes more money, and Daniel's children do not get food on the plate tonight. Or you could buy it from Daniel's website or Amazon with Rabinia Group as the seller. So the choice is yours, whatever you want. Yeah.
The choice is yours. No, we'll have food. I can tell you the abundance of a wildland. There's food everywhere. But, we'll have less shoes or something.
I love it. Well,
Thanks.
Daniel, man, I always love talking to you. These conversations are always so rich. And I love that, we kind of planned out some things we were going to talk about, and we didn't really talk about any of it. It always just goes in a million different directions. So, we could do more of these. Thank you for joining us today. To everyone who's tuned in, appreciate you being here. Leave a comment on what you thought of this video, any follow-up questions. We'll continue to monitor those and chime in and answer questions if you have them after the fact. That's no problem. Share this video with folks. Follow Daniel and all of the Timshel Wildland stuff on social media. Sign up for his newsletter. Sign up for our newsletter. All the typical spiels that everyone does at the end of a video. Follow us. Pay attention to this content if you enjoy it. If not, that's cool too.
Yeah. Thank you, Bobby. I want to just take 5 seconds to say thanks to the Savory Institute. Thanks to you and your friendship. We joined as a Savory Hub. It was funny. Daniela asked us why. Why did we join or apply to be a Savory Hub? And I said community. And at the time, this book wasn't even a thought, but it was for community. The Savory Institute and the network that you guys have built all around the world is a network of community. And we applied just to join it. We didn't even think our application was going to be entertained, let alone accepted, and now we're here. But we were just looking for a community, and you guys really, really do that very well. So I want to thank you guys.
Well, I appreciate that. And, the Savory Network is community. I mean, it is not made up of the Savory Institute. It is made up of the Savory Hubs and the accredited professionals. And, just for anyone that's curious, you can find, whoever your local Savory Hub is. If you go to savory.global/hubs, there's hubs all around the world. You'll be able to find who your local hub is, what they're up to. Not everyone is like Daniel. Everyone is very different and very beautiful in a different way.
Much smarter, probably.
But they've probably written less books. So
maybe.
I think think you carry that title as most books written as a Savory hub. So, Daniel, we appreciate you so much. Thank you for the talks today. Again, the link for people, bit.ly/wildflowers. And with that, we will see you all next time. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks, everybody, for joining in.
All right. Bye.
Blessing.